The porch light flickered twice before I finally turned the key. My hands were shaking so hard the metal scraped against the lock. I didn't want to go inside. I wanted to stay in the damp November air and pretend the last 40 minutes never happened. But the engine was still ticking behind me. His headlights cut through the fog and pinned me to the door. I heard the window roll down. I heard him say my name like it was a warning. I didn't turn around. I just pushed the door open and stepped into the dark hallway, knowing exactly what I had just broken, and knowing I would do it again. 3 years ago, my life fit neatly into labeled boxes. I worked the early shift at the clinic. I paid the mortgage on time. I folded David's shirts while the coffee brewed. We were the couple people pointed to when they wanted proof that quiet love actually worked. We didn't fight. We didn't raise our voices. We just moved through the house like careful guests. That was the problem. Everything was so polished it felt hollow. I started noticing the silence more than the conversation. I started counting the seconds between his kisses. I told myself it was just fatigue. I told myself marriage was supposed to settle into something steady. Then Julian started coming to the clinic. He wasn't a patient. He was the new vendor rep, dropping off supply orders every other Thursday. He wore scuffed boots and carried a clipboard like it weighed nothing. He never lingered. He just nodded, signed the sheet, and left. I didn't think about him after he walked out. Not at first. I just noticed how the fluorescent lights caught the gray in his hair. I noticed how he always held the door for the nurses. I noticed how my chest tightened when his shadow crossed the reception desk. David and I had stopped asking each other real questions. We talked about groceries, we talked about the leaky faucet, we talked about anything that didn't require an honest answer. I convinced myself that safety was enough. I convinced myself that wanting more was selfish. But the house felt heavier every night. The kitchen clock ticked too loud. The hallway footsteps sounded like they belonged to strangers. I kept waiting for something to crack. I just didn't expect it to be me. It started with a coffee cup left on the counter. Julian had come in during a rainstorm, soaked through his jacket, and I handed him a paper cup without thinking. He took it. His fingers brushed mine. It was nothing. It was everything. He didn't pull away right away. I felt the heat of his skin. I felt my breath catch. I stepped back and pretended to check the inventory log. He thanked me quietly. Then he asked how long I'd been working there. I told him 7 years. He nodded like he already knew. The next Thursday, he brought 2 coffees. He set one on the desk without a word. I stared at it until the steam faded. I drank it anyway. It tasted like burnt sugar and bad decisions. I didn't tell David. I told myself it was just courtesy. But the glances started lingering. The small talk stopped feeling small. He asked about the ring on my finger. I twisted it without answering. He didn't push. He just watched my hands. I hated how seen I felt. I hated how much I wanted it. One evening, David fell asleep on the couch before 9. The television hummed. The blue light washed over his face. I stood in the doorway and realized I couldn't remember the last time he looked at me like I was a mystery. I walked to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water I didn't need. I stood by the sink and listened to the house breathe. My phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number. Just 3 words. You okay today? I knew who it was. I shouldn't have known. But I did. I stared at the screen until it went dark. I didn't reply. I locked the phone face down. I told myself it was over. It wasn't. The next morning I caught my reflection in the clinic window. I looked tired. I looked hungry. I adjusted my collar and walked inside. Julian was already there. He didn't smile. He just held the door open. I walked past him. I felt the air shift. I felt the ground tilt. I kept walking. I didn't look back. I should have. We started meeting in the parking lot after closing. Just 10 minutes. Just to talk. That's what I told myself. We stood by his truck while the streetlights buzzed overhead. He asked about my day. I asked about his route. We never touched. We never crossed the line. Not yet, but the space between us felt charged, like static before a storm. I started leaving the house earlier. I started taking longer lunch breaks. I started memorizing the sound of his boots on the pavement. David noticed the distance. He asked if I was stressed. I said work was heavy. He believed me. I hated that he believed me. One Tuesday, the clinic ran late. I walked out to an empty lot. My phone buzzed in my pocket. "Still here?" I typed back before I could stop myself. 5 minutes. His headlights appeared at the far end of the row. I got in. I didn't think. I just closed the door and let the quiet swallow me. He didn't start the engine. He just turned to look at me. The dashboard glow cut across his face. I saw the hesitation in his eyes. I saw the same war I was fighting. He asked if I was sure. I didn't answer. I just leaned forward. The space closed. The air went thin. A car door slammed outside. We froze. Footsteps echoed past the windshield. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled back so fast I hit my shoulder on the window. He swore under his breath. I opened the door and slipped out into the cold. I didn't look back. I walked to my car with shaking hands. I sat in the dark until my breathing steadied. I told myself it was a mistake. I told myself it wouldn't happen again. It happened again 3 days later, and again the week after. We stopped pretending it was about coffee. We stopped pretending it was about conversation. I started lying about overtime. I started hiding receipts. I started erasing text threads before I walked through my front door. David started leaving notes on the fridge. "Miss you. Let's talk soon." I read them and felt sick. I folded them and tucked them in a drawer. I couldn't face him. I couldn't face myself. The guilt sat heavy in my throat. The desire burned hotter. I was tearing myself in half and calling it survival. Then came the night the power went out. The house went black. David lit a candle and set it on the table. He asked me to sit. He asked me what was wrong. I stared at the flame. I watched the wax pool. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. My phone vibrated against my thigh. I didn't move. He reached across the table. His fingers brushed mine. I flinched. He pulled back. The silence stretched until it snapped. I stood up. I walked out. I left him sitting in the dark. I drove to the edge of town where the streetlights gave out. The road turned to gravel. The trees closed in. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I couldn't go back. My phone lit up the dashboard. His name flashed across the screen. I let it ring. I let it go to voicemail. I pulled over and killed the engine. The quiet was suffocating. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel. I tried to picture David's face. I tried to picture Julian's hands. Both images blurred. I felt hollow. I felt cracked open. I reached for the door handle. I stepped out into the damp air. I walked to the hood of the car and stared into the trees. Headlights cut through the dark. Tires crunched on gravel. I didn't turn around. I already knew. The engine cut. A door opened. Footsteps approached. Slow. Deliberate. He stopped a few feet behind me. I felt his presence like a weight. I kept my eyes on the tree line. I waited for him to speak. I waited for him to leave. He didn't do either. He just stepped closer. His voice was low, rough. "Tell me to walk away." I closed my eyes. The wind moved through the branches. My chest tightened. I turned around. I looked at him. I saw the exhaustion. I saw the want. I opened my mouth. The words came out before I could cage them. "Don't." I swallowed hard. "Please don't stop." The air left his lungs. Something broke behind his eyes. He didn't move at first. Then he closed the distance. I didn't pull back. I let it happen. I let the line vanish. I let the last piece of who I was slip through my fingers. The morning after felt like walking through glass. I woke up in a motel room I didn't recognize. The curtains were drawn. The air smelled like stale coffee and cheap soap. I lay still and listened to the shower run. I counted the cracks in the ceiling. I tried to remember how to breathe. I drove home with the windows down. The cold air bit my skin. I parked 2 streets over and walked the rest of the way. I slipped through the back door. The kitchen was empty. The clock read 6:42. David's coat was gone. His keys were missing. A note sat on the counter. Gone to the site. Back late. I exhaled. I shouldn't have felt relief. I did. I scrubbed my hands until they burned. I changed clothes. I threw the old ones in the bottom of the hamper. I stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were hollow. Her mouth was tight. She looked guilty. She looked alive. I hated both. The lies got heavier. The silences got longer. David started coming home later. He stopped asking about my day. He stopped leaving notes. We moved around each other like ghosts sharing a hallway. I saw the doubt settle in. I saw the trust fracture. I did nothing to fix it. Julian and I stopped meeting in public. We stopped pretending we could control it. The texts came at odd hours. The calls went unanswered. The guilt curdled into something darker. I started jumping at every floorboard creak. I started checking the driveway before I opened the blinds. I lived in a constant state of waiting to be caught, waiting to be freed, waiting for the ground to finally give out. It gave out on a Thursday. David came home early. I was in the shower. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't hear it. He did. I stepped out wrapped in a towel. He was standing by the bed. The screen was lit. The message was still visible. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He just looked at me. Really looked at me. Then he set the phone down. He walked out. He didn't slam the door. That was worse. I didn't chase him. I sat on the edge of the mattress and listened to his car pull away. The house settled into a heavy quiet. I picked up the phone. I deleted the thread. I turned it off. I didn't call Julian. I didn't call anyone. I just sat there until the light shifted across the floor. I packed a bag that night, not to leave, just to feel like I could. I stared at the closet like it held answers. It didn't. Nothing did. I realized then that I hadn't been running toward him. I had been running from the hollow space inside myself. I mistook hunger for love. I mistook escape for freedom. I stayed in the house. I went to work. I answered emails. I smiled at patients. I learned how to carry the weight without buckling. David and I spoke in careful sentences. We divided the rooms. We divided the silence. We never raised our voices. We just let the distance harden into something permanent. I don't blame him for walking away. I don't blame Julian for staying quiet. I blame myself for thinking I could split my life in half and keep both pieces intact. You can't. Something always bleeds out. Something always stays broken. I still hear his truck idle outside my dreams. I still whisper the same words into the dark. I just don't know who I'm begging anymore.